Welcome back to the Interact Post. Today in Article 19, we're going to be looking over and going over Arlecchino, as well as looking at her weapon, some artifact sets that's come out with her, as well as some bosses, and also looking at just in general a lot of stuff that's coming out in 4.6, looking at events, possible stuff for Emilie in 4.8. Besides that, thank you guys for watching. Now on to the video. So the first thing we do want to go over once again is Arlecchino's kit. Now, we did have a video that we put up recently going over her kit and looking over that, but I just want to quickly, really quick, just go over her kit in terms of kind of what that looks like. First, she has a normal attack combo that's pretty normal, but she does have a special ability with her normal attacks and only for her normal attacks that when Arlecchino has a bond of life equal to or greater than 30% of her max HP, she receives a 40% pyro damage bonus that you're going to get and an infusion while doing so. So keeping above 30% bond of life is going to be a big part of for her kit. Now, doing this as well, when she actually does normal attack, she'll actually do a lot more damage while she's in this state because of that pyro damage bonus, but also in general, she'll have, based on her bond of life, she'll get an extra attack multiplier on top of this to make her bond of life damage do more. Now, looking into her skill, it talks about basically the whole point of her skill is to be getting these blood debt directives, and that's basically going to happen when you hit and use your skill. It's going to be dealing an AoE pyro damage hit, and opponents will be hit by this attack and get a blood debt directive applied to them. Now, when doing this, Arlecchino's bond of life will be cleared, and she will then be healed by the equivalent to 100% of the value of the bond of life that she just cleared of herself. Now, these blood debt directives, she's going to have these and put these on opponents, and it's going to last for 30 seconds, and it's going to do 3 instances of pyro damage over 3 seconds each, and then she'll have max of 3 of these happening. When she uses a charge attack during this part, she will then absorb and clear any blood debt directives on specific enemies, and then she'll grant herself a 20% bond of life for every time that she does so, or every time basically that she absorbs one of those blood debt directives. And the maximum that she can do that over a 20-second period after using the elemental skill is 80% of her max HP, so just keep that in mind a little bit for what she does. Her burst is really just a huge AoE pyro hit, as well as a little bit of help by getting 15% of her max HP as a bond of life back to her, so it's a little bit more to just help her do a little bit more damage. And basically, once again, keep over that 30% bond of life. Her passives and whatnot just help her get either a lot more bond of life, worth up to 70% for max HP, when you defeat a foe that has a blood debt directive on them, or it even goes into talking about getting a lot of elemental and physical resistance based on her attack. And then her final one talks about Arlecchino can only be healed by using her skill when she's in combat, meaning that characters like Bennett or party-wide heals like Sean Yoon cannot actually heal her when you're in combat. So keep that in mind, she's the only one that can heal herself. But looking beyond her actual kit, Rift, now that I've beaten that to a dead horse, Rift, what can you tell us about her weapon?
Well, taking a look at her weapon, first off, I gotta say, it looks really cool. If you have seen some gameplay from beta testers, you already know it looks pretty sick. It really matches her design, and especially because she kind of has a scythe design when doing her attacks and whatnot. And her personal weapon kind of plays with that, and it gives it even a cooler look when you use parts of her abilities. So it is kind of, in a sense, for cosmetics, it is kind of necessary. But if you don't care about cosmetics, then I guess it's not necessary. You can use other good pole arms like Stab of Homa. But if you use Arlecchino's attacks and you aren't using her weapon, you'll actually notice at certain parts of gameplay that there'll kind of be this slight visage or image of a scythe shape kind of on the whatever weapon you're using. So it kind of looks funny if you're not using her weapon. But once again, if you don't care about cosmetics, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's just a cool detail that they did for design with the weapons. As we've seen with a lot of the new 5-star weapons, really since Fontaine, we've started to see a lot more unique and more personal design with the weapons, and going correlation to the 5 stars. We saw that with like Navia's battle axe, right? Because like the first claymore that actually looks like a battle axe. So seeing something like that really opened up some hopes to see like, oh, maybe Arlecchino will get a scythe looking weapon. And so we're not getting like new types of weapons, but we are starting to get weapons that look more like what would match them, right? So it's not an actual scythe new archetype, but it's still a polearm. But like the fact that it looks like a scythe is pretty dang cool, if I don't say so myself. But looking more at the stats of the weapon, you got a base attack of 674 at level 90, and it has a main stat of crit rate, sitting at 22.1% when at level 90, so very similar to like Primordial Jadewing Spear. Looking at the ability, it grants a bond of life equal to 25% of max HP when a charged attack hits an opponent. This effect can be triggered up to once every 14 seconds, and in addition to this, when the equipping character has a bond of life, they gain a 12% damage bonus. And if the value of the bond of life is greater than or equal to 30% of max HP, then the character will gain an additional 20% damage bonus. So as we already kind of looked over Arlecchino's kit, that's going to play greatly into what you already want to do in her kit. You already are wanting to stay above 30% threshold on the bond of life to get the pyro damage bonus. And with the skill, if you use a charged attack, you're actually going to grant a bond of life worth 20% of her max HP. So naturally in the gameplay, whether or not you have her weapon, you want to use her charge attacks, right? And so with her weapon giving her bond of life with a charge attack, you're now going to be getting like 45% bond of life just from doing a charge attack while having her weapon. So it kind of greatly increases the damage potential for Arlecchino. I think it's going to be one of those things we see that when comparing should you have the weapon for the character versus going after this first constellation, it's going to be really tricky. It just depends on how good her constellation is going to be. Which, if we're just going to look at that first constellation, it says that when normal attacks from the Mask of the Red Death buff hits an opponent, it has a 33% chance of not consuming Arlecchino's Bond of Life, instead granting a Bond of Life worth 5% of her max HP. So it's going to give you some chances to actually build it up a little bit better than if you don't have the first constellation. So this can be very good. There is some kind of RNG behind it, but it still, I think, can play out. And because of the RNG factor, in my personal opinion alone, I feel like going after the weapon is going to be a more solid, permanent upgrade for the character, especially just because of how much it's specifically helping Arlecchino. So overall, I think this weapon is going to be very powerful for the character, much like how we already see Nervalette. His weapon is very powerful for him.
Exactly. I totally think that her weapon in general is just going to be really, really good. And I actually really like going over that constellation because it does matter a lot. Because normally when you're doing those normal attacks, you'll be losing about 5.5% for every normal attack you do for that bond of life. You're going to be getting rid of bond of life. But now that constellation allows you not only to just get rid of that loss, but it's now talking about actually gaining. So it's a 10% change overall. It's a -5 to a +5. So it can help a little bit more in terms of that. I think that's probably definitely the way to go, is the weapon over the constellation. But looking a little bit deeper into the idea of what's coming out in 4.6, we do have 2 new artifact sets, and we didn't go over them in the last video that we made over Arlecchino because we just really wanted to understand and explain really her kit. But looking here at the first artifact set, and it looks like it's going to be for Arlecchino, it's called Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, and the 2-piece set gives 18% attack, which we already know she scales a lot off of attack. She's going to be focusing heavily on it, especially with that weapon having a high base attack. The 4-piece states when the value of a bond of life increases or decreases, this character deals 18% increased damage for 6 seconds and has a max of 3 stacks, giving this the idea to have 54% more damage when your bond of life is changing. And considering we know that those normal attacks, once again, are going to be either, if you have the C1, increasing your bond of life, or if you don't have the C1, you just had C0, you're still actually either going up or down in it every normal attack. You're going to be going down with the normal attack, but your skill is going to be increasing it, your burst is going to be increasing it, charge attacks are going to be increasing it. The normal attacks are the only thing that's really decreasing your bond of life. So in general, this is just a really great set to give her and a lot of damage with it. Now, the other 4-piece set that's going to be with it in the domain is called Unfinished Reverie. It has a 2-piece set that gives 18% attack, and a 4-piece set that states that after leaving combat for 3 whole seconds, damage dealt is increased by 50%. While in combat, if no burning opponents are nearby for more than 6 seconds, this damage bonus will decrease by 10% per second until it reaches 0%. When a burning opponent exists, it will increase by 10% instead until it reaches 50%. The effect is still triggered while the equipping character is off field, so that is something nice to see, and I think this is going to be focused heavily on what we're going to see with Emilie, and once again, we'll get that a little bit later once we talk about the 4.8 section of this video, so if you guys want to jump over there really quick, or want to focus on a lot more 4.6 stuff, you can go ahead there as you please. Now, Rift, looking a little bit beyond the artifact sets, it seems like we've got some extra bosses, and, obviously the weekly boss, as well as some different things, as well as, regular bosses or opponents in the overworld we're going to be fighting, if you could go over those.
So yeah, these Golem guys look pretty interesting. Will probably be a lot of fun to fight. So Arlecchino is going to be the new weekly boss fight. Obviously, you're going to want to be fighting her if you're going to be getting Arlecchino, get those weekly materials to get your talents leveled up in those high levels. And then the Golem Captain is going to be her overworld boss. You'll probably want to fight, and especially if you're going to be ascending her up to 90. Obviously, you'll want to do that. So while the Golem Captain is going to be the new overworld boss, we'll also have a new enemy type called Golem Guards, and these kind of remind me of those black serpent knights you find in the chasm, which I personally really like to fight. I don't know what it is about them, but maybe it's because they're a little tankier than normal, and that's kind of fun, especially if you have powerful teams already. It's just fun to be able to actually go through a full rotation before killing them with your support. So maybe that's what it is, but I think this is going to be really fun. They look pretty cool, and I'm excited. I always like fighting new enemy types.
The enemies do look really, really fun, so we'll get to see a little bit more of that, I guess, when 4.6 actually drops. Now, looking a little bit further into 4.6, there's a lot of talk about what's actually going to be on the banners, and we haven't really gotten a lot of perfection on what is actually going to be on the banners, but we know two characters besides Arlecchino for sure. And that is Alhaitham and Farina. It seems like both of these characters are going to be on the second half, and we don't really know who's going to rerun alongside of Arlecchino. Some people are saying Linny, some people are saying Nilu. It's kind of back and forth between the two, and there really hasn't been recently any speculation on a furtherance of how that's actually going to work out and which one they're going to choose. But as time goes on, we'll get a little bit more information on that. But I'm really excited to see Alhaitham and Farina. You know, this upcoming patch that we're getting right here in the next few weeks is Neuvillette and Kazuha, and with Neuvillette being the, one of the best, if not the best, Dendro, or sorry, not Dendro, just DPS in general, sorry. He's kind of just a very high pull value character right now, as well as Kazuha is just a high pull value character as well. And even if you already have him, a lot of people talk about his C2 getting all that extra elemental mastery for himself and other party members, which can even be used for, some Dendro teams. I don't know what really about, this second half is just funny or similar to it as well, but Farina, obviously, this is her first rerun. She's the Hydro Archon and probably the best support in the game right now. You can argue for some people like Nahida, who's the Dendro Archon, or some other people, but really right now, especially with all these new characters having changes in HP, it seems like Farina is the best support that can really be beneficial during the Fontaine era. And so that's just a really goated, just banner already to have one of the best characters to have a rerun. But then you have Alhaitham, who is probably the best Dendro DPS right now in terms of damage and whatnot, and usability in Hyperbloom teams as well as just, spread teams. So I think this banner is just kind of goated.
I definitely agree with you. This is kind of a area where like we're hitting up and coming up on like a lot of just really good characters, right? We got Neuvillette, Kazuha coming up, and then we've got the new Arlecchino. Everyone's going to be, drooling over that, right? And then Farina's rerun, which is big. She's the Archon, and if you didn't pull her the first time, you could heavily consider. And then Alhaitham's another awesome DPS. Like this is they're all really great characters when you step back and look at all of them for real. So like that's going to be very, very cool. And everything you said, like just on par. But looking at the next stuff, we're actually looking at the events in 4.6. So there's going to be probably some Arataki event like we have had in the past. I personally always like these events because Arataki Ito's personality, he's just a very fun character, and the events can, genuinely be enjoyable just because he's kind of funny. We're also going to be getting the Wind Trace event coming back. Now, that is a lot of people's favorite because it got a nice co-op element to it of hide and seek, and so I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I always personally have fun with it as well. We're also having something called Chronicles of the Dragon of Unique Form in Search of Battle. Now, that's a long name for an event, and I'm assuming that's going to be a more battle-oriented event just by the name. So that'll be very fun for us combat-oriented people like myself. And then we also have the Vibro Crystal Applied Research. Now, by the name of that, if I remember correctly, I think the last time we had that was somewhere in Sumeru, but I remember it being my first time was in the Chasm, I believe. And I think that's also another combat-oriented event, so that'll also be very fun, allowing you to use a lot of trial characters, which I really personally enjoy. It's very nice if you don't have a lot of the characters to kind of get a good testing of them and see if you like them or not.
Looking at this next speculation, going beyond the events, it looks like we're opening up the map for 4.6 and possibly a little bit more. There seems like there's an overworld area where it's just a small tiny island, I guess, kind of in this huge water area in between Sumeru's desert region, regular region, Chenyu Vale, and Fontaine. Now there's that big huge dark spot that's kind of not available to us right now, but it seems like it's mostly water with a small island, and a lot of people are confused as to why that is. it seems like the biggest part of it is actually what's underneath, and it is called Rumeria. Rumeria seems to be a huge, open, expansive area under where that water area is, and it seems like most of it is pretty explorable, and it almost kind of takes the size land of Enkanomiya. Now, with Enkanomiya, it's pretty spread out, but with this, it could be a little bit more compact and maybe a little bit smaller, but it seems like there's a lot of exploration going on here in Rumeria, and I don't know, it seems really, really interesting, and I love when they do underwater stuff, especially with almost a different area, completely new, in this kind of Fontaine slash Sumeru area. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Rift. I always love the underwater maps.
I'm just excited that my OCD will finally go away with this hole in the map being filled in, because I every time I see it, I'm just like, oh, I need this filled in, right? So that'll cure my OCD, which I'm very excited for. I do like this idea too of when I first saw the overworld map being filled in, I was like, okay, cool, yeah. There's like a tiny island though, and it's mostly waters. So my first thought was like, okay, maybe it's underwater, and yeah, it's gonna be it's going to be Remuria. So that'll be a lot of fun just by the looks of it. But moving on, we are possibly getting a new character, I'm going to guess he's probably a 4-star. His name is Sethos. And to me, I'll just, right off the bat, he kind of just looks like Sayu as a playable 4-star. If you don't know who Sayu is, that's Alejandro Saab, voice actor of Sino, his VTuber model, and this new character model just kind of looks like it to me, which I find kind of funny. But he's going to be a bow character, possibly playable in 4.6, because we are also getting that. If you remember from a few videos ago, we did mention a possible Sino story quest, part 2 to his story quest being in 4.6, which led to a lot of people thinking, oh, Sino's probably going to rerun with Farina or Arlecchino, stuff like that. So you can find that in our last Interact post. But I think that'll be kind of cool. Maybe he has this Sethos character has some affiliation with Sino. So that'll be very interesting to see.
Looking beyond the actual 4-star that might come out in maybe 4.7, maybe even 4.8, talking about Emilie and actually getting a leak here. Now, we haven't seen too much about really her speculation of what her kit really looks like, but we did get something really, really quick talking about what she could possibly do. A lot of it seems that she's going to be either a Dendro Catalyst or a Dendro Polearm, and at this point we don't really know for sure. The recent speculation has been a Dendro Polearm, though, as a 5-star. And with that, she's going to have an elemental skill that is going to strike opponents and leave a field on nearby. Now, she's basically going to be similar to how you would use Baiju or Yelan, where you're going to be using this to target and hit multiple enemies. Now, she also is going to be applying Dendro on herself, so that should be kind of interesting, because I don't know if another character does that right now. Whereas she's also going to be hitting them with a Nebel Mark. The Nebel Mark will deal Dendro damage over time and have continuous damage on marked opponents that will be based off of Emilie's attack and elemental mastery. Now, if you go back and look at the artifact set, we did talk about that having a 2-piece into attack percent, but it's also helping with burning. And a lot of the times when we use burning, obviously we're focusing on having characters use a lot of elemental mastery, and so it's a little difficult to really pinpoint how that specific artifact set is going to be helping characters, and it seems like this set is specifically meant for her. If you use the hold version of this skill instead, Emilie will then be granted a few different effects. She's going to be granted a Dendro Infusion, so that'll be nice, especially if she is that polearm character. And when you do damage as a charge attack, you will be unleashing an extra Dendro hit that is called Thorny Blast. Now, alongside of this, I think the burst is really kind of interesting because you're going to be putting out a Violet Bud, and that pulls all Dendro cores within its AoE to the enemy's weak spot, or really to them, and then deals damage with small clusters of Dendro damage at certain different intervals, kind of similar to what Baiju does. Alongside of this, she has an alternate sprint, which consumes stamina obviously, but she's also going to be cloaking herself in Verdant Mist that moves with her. Now, what's kind of interesting specifically about this, and how it makes sense and ties to the last kit, when you're looking at that 4-piece set for the burning reaction, the first part talks about leaving combat for 3 seconds. And now she has an alternate sprint that kind of makes her disappear. Now, and it talks about cloaking herself. I don't know if this actually has her leave from combat. If so, that would be a little nice, but the problem is the bosses could possibly regain HP or whatnot, but that's kind of interesting to look at with that whole I don't know. It's maybe she's going to be more along the lines of someone like Yelan, where she kind of goes quote unquote invisible for a few seconds while she's, using her hold skill. Whereas here, it just seems like maybe she goes either underground, or it's maybe an offset, version of what Ayaka and Mona do, where they kind of go underground, whereas she's probably just going to be above ground, but just kind of in this mist. So that seems a little bit interesting, as well as she seems to be some sort of DPS or sub DPS character. So keep your eyes on the rise for Emilie and kind of what she can do, and we'll try to keep you guys updated on what we get in terms of her speculations.
Yeah, Emily look, I mean, it's so far away, but she looks pretty cool. I feel like she'll possibly be what Genshin is trying to add into the game for, to help burning, because burning exists, right? But there was never really something that specifically was tailored to help burning teams, if that makes sense. So I feel like Emily will probably be that character, and they're probably going into a damage over time type of mechanic, where we have seen that in something like Star Rail with the Nihility characters, Kafka, Black Swan, stuff like that, and those can be pretty fun and very cool. So maybe that's Genshin's way of, we're gonna get that in Genshin with the burning reaction, and they're gonna have this artifact set that helps that, and Emily's probably the main character that's gonna help with teams that involve burning.
We hope you guys have enjoyed the video so far. If you do, please go ahead and like and subscribe if you guys have enjoyed the content. And also go ahead and check out our Discord. And once again, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.